Welcome to a Fireside Reading of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Chapter 59, Part 1. Return. I landed in London on a wintry autumn evening. It was dark and raining, and I saw more fog and mud in a minute than I had seen in a year. I walked from the Custom House to the Monument before I found a coach, and although the very house fronts looking on the swollen gutters were like old friends to me, I could not but admit that they were very dingy friends. I have often remarked, I suppose everybody has, that one's going away from a familiar place would seem to be the signal for change in it. As I looked out of the coach window and observed that an old house on Fish Street Hill, which had stood untouched by painter, carpenter, or bricklayer for a century, had been pulled down in my absence, and that a neighboring street of time-honored insalubrity and inconvenience was being drained and widened, I half expected to find St. Paul's Cathedral looking older. For some changes in the fortunes of my friends, I was prepared. My aunt had long been re-established at Dover, and Traddles had begun to get into some little practice at the bar in the very first term after my departure. He had chambers in Gray's Inn now, and had told me in his last letters that he was not without hopes of being soon united to the dearest girl in the world. They expected me home before Christmas, but had no idea of my returning so soon. I had purposely misled them that I might have the pleasure of taking them by surprise. And yet I was perverse enough to feel a chill and disappointment in receiving no one and rattling, alone and silent, through the misty streets. The well-known shops, however, with their cheerful lights, did something for me. And when I alighted at the door of the Gray's Inn coffee house, I had recovered my spirits. It recalled at first that so different time when I had put up at the Golden Cross, and reminded me of the changes that had come to pass since then. But that was natural. "Do you know where Mr. Traddles lives in the inn?" I asked the waiter as I warmed myself by the coffee-room fire. "Holborn Court, sir, number 2. "Mr. Traddles has a rising reputation among the lawyers, I believe?" said I. "Well, sir," returned the waiter, "probably he has, sir, but I'm not aware of it myself." This waiter, who was middle-aged and spare, looked for help to a waiter of more authority, a stout, potential old man with a double chin in black breeches and stockings, who came out of a place like a churchwarden's pew at the end of the coffee-room, where he kept company with a cash-box, a directory, a law list, and other books and papers. "Mr. Traddles," said the spare waiter, "number 2 in the court." The potential waiter waved him away and turned gravely to me. "I was inquiring," said I, "whether Mr. Traddles, at number 2 in the court, has not a rising reputation among the lawyers?" "Never heard his name," said the waiter in a rich, husky voice. I felt quite apologetic for Traddles. "He's a young man, sure," said the portentous waiter, fixing his eyes severely on me. "How long has he been in the inn?" "Not above 3 years," said I. The waiter, who I supposed had lived in his churchwarden's pew for 40 years, could not pursue such an insignificant subject. He asked me what I would have for dinner. I felt I was in England again, and really was quite cast down on Traddles's account. There seemed to be no hope for him. I meekly ordered a bit of fish and a steak, and stood before the fire musing on his obscurity. As I followed the chief waiter with my eyes, I could not help thinking that the garden in which he had gradually blown to be the flower he was an arduous place to rise in. It had such a prescriptive, stiff-necked, long-established, solemn, elderly air. I glanced about the room, which had had its sanded floor sanded, no doubt, in exactly the same manner when the chief waiter was a boy, if he ever was a boy, which appeared improbable, and at the shining tables, where I saw myself reflected in unruffled depths of old mahogany, and at the lamps, without a flaw in their trimming or cleaning, and at the comfortable green curtains with their pure brass rods snugly enclosing the boxes, and at the 2 large coal fires brightly burning, and at the rows of decanters, burly as if with the consciousness of pipes of expensive old port wine below. And both England and the law appeared to me to be very difficult indeed to be taken by storm. I went up to my bedroom to change my wet clothes. And the vast extent of that old wainscoted apartment, which was over the archway leading to the inn, I remember, and the sedate immensity of the 4-post bedstead, and the indomitable gravity of the chests of drawers, all seemed to unite in sternly frowning on the fortunes of Traddles, or on any such daring youth. I came down again to my dinner, and even the slow comfort of the meal and the orderly silence of the place, which was bare of guests, the long vacation not being over, were eloquent on the audacity of Traddles and his small hopes of a livelihood for 20 years to come. I had seen nothing like this since I went away, and it quite dashed my hopes for my friend. The chief waiter had had enough of me. He came near me no more, but devoted himself to an old gentleman in long gaiters, to meet whom a pint of special port seemed to come out of the cellar of its own accord, for he gave no order. The second waiter informed me in a whisper that this old gentleman was a retired conveyancer living in the square and worth a mint of money, which it was expected he would leave to his laundress's daughter. Likewise, that it was rumoured that he had a service of plate in a bureau, all tarnished with lying by, though more than one spoon and a fork had never yet been beheld in his chambers by mortal vision. By this time I quite gave Traddles up for lost, and settled in my own mind that there was no hope for him. Being very anxious to see the dear old fellow, nevertheless, I dispatched my dinner in a manner not at all calculated to raise me in the opinion of the chief waiter, and hurried out by the back way. Number 2 in the court was soon reached, and an inscription on the doorpost informing me that Mr. Traddles occupied a set of chambers on the top story, I ascended the staircase. A crazy old staircase I found it to be, feebly lighted on each landing by a club-headed little oil wick dying away in a little dungeon of dirty glass. In the course of my stumbling upstairs, I fancied I heard a pleasant sound of laughter, and not the laughter of an attorney or barrister or attorney's clerk or barrister's clerk, but of 2 or 3 merry girls. Happening, however, as I stopped to listen, I put my foot in a hole where the Honourable Society of Gray's Inn had left a plank deficient. I fell down with some noise, and when I recovered my footing, all was silent. Groping my way more carefully for the rest of the journey, my heart beat high when I found the outer door, which had Mr. Traddles painted on it, open. I knocked. A considerable scuffling within ensued, but nothing else. I therefore knocked again. A small, sharp-looking lad, half footboy and half clerk, who was very much out of breath, but who looked at me as if he defied me to prove it legally, presented himself. "Is Mr. Traddles within?" I said.
"Yes, sir, but he's engaged."
"I want to see him." After a moment's survey of me, the sharp-looking lad decided to let me in, and opening the door wider for that purpose admitted me, first into a little closet of a hall, and next into a little sitting-room, where I came into the presence of my old friend, also out of breath, seated at a table and bending over papers. "Good God!" cried Traddles, looking up. "It's Copperfield!" and rushed into my arms, where I held him tight. "All well, my dear Traddles? All well, my dear, dear Copperfield? And nothing but good news?" we cried with pleasure, both of us. "My dear fellow," said Traddles, rumpling his hair in his excitement, which was a most unnecessary operation. "My dearest Copperfield, my long-lost and most welcome friend, how glad I am to see you. How brown you are! How glad I am! Upon my life and honour, I never was so rejoiced, my beloved Copperfield, never!" I was equally at a loss to express my emotions. I was quite unable to speak at first. "My dear fellow," said Traddles, "and grown so famous! My glorious Copperfield! Good gracious me! When did you come? Where have you come from? What have you been doing?" Never pausing for an answer to anything he said, Traddles, who had clapped me into an easy chair by the fire, all this time impetuously stirred the fire with one hand and pulled at my neckerchief with the other under some wild delusion that it was a greatcoat. Without putting down the poker, he now hugged me again, and I hugged him, and both laughing and both wiping our eyes, we both sat down and shook hands across the hearth. "To think," said Traddles, "that you should have been so nearly coming home, as you must have been, my dear old boy, and not at the ceremony." "What ceremony, my dear Traddles?" "Good gracious me!" cried Traddles, opening his eyes in his old way. "Didn't you get my last letter?" "Certainly not, if it referred to any ceremony." "Why, my dear Copperfield," said Traddles, sticking his hair upright with both hands and then putting his hands on my knees, "I am married." "Married?" I cried joyfully. "Lord bless me, yes," said Traddles. "By the Reverend Horace to Sophie, down in Devonshire. Why, my dear boy, she's behind the curtained window. Look here." To my amazement, the dearest girl in the world came at that same instant, laughing and blushing from her place of concealment, and a more cheerful, amiable, honest, happy, bright-looking bride, I believe, as I could not help saying on the spot, the world never saw. I kissed her as an old acquaintance should, and wished them joy with all my might of heart. "Dear me," said Traddles, "what a delightful reunion this is! You are so extremely brown, my dear Copperfield. God bless my soul, how happy I am." "And so am I," said I. "And I am sure I am," said the blushing and laughing Sophie. "We are all as happy as possible," said Traddles. "Even the girls are happy, dear me. I declare I forgot them." "Forgot?" said I. "The girls," said Traddles. "Sophie's sisters. They are staying with us. They have come to have a peep at London. The fact is, when... Was it you that tumbled upstairs, Copperfield? It was, said I, laughing. Well then, when you tumbled upstairs, said Traddles, I was romping with the girls. In point of fact, we were playing at Puss in the Corner, but as that wouldn't do in Westminster Hall, and as it wouldn't look quite professional if they were seen by a client, they decamped. And they are now listening, I have no doubt, said Traddles, glancing at the door of another room. I am sorry, said I, laughing afresh, to have occasioned such a dispersion. Upon my word, rejoiced Traddles, greatly delighted, if you had seen them running away and running back again after you'd knocked to pick up the combs they'd dropped out of their hair and going on in the maddest manner, you wouldn't have said so. My love, will you fetch the girls? Sophie tripped away, and we heard her received in the adjoining room with a peal of laughter. Really musical, isn't it, my dear Copperfield? Said Traddles. It's very agreeable to hear. It quite lights up these old rooms. To an unfortunate bachelor of a fellow who's lived alone all his life, you know, it's positively delicious. It's charming. Poor things. They've had a great loss in Sophie, who, I do assure you, Copperfield, is and ever was the dearest girl, and it gratifies me beyond expression to find them in such good spirits. The society of girls is a very delightful thing, Copperfield. It's not professional, but it's very delightful. Observing that he slightly faltered, and comprehending that in the goodness of his heart he was fearful of giving me some pain by what he'd said, I expressed my concurrence with a heartiness that evidently relieved and pleased him greatly. But then, said Traddles, our domestic arrangements are, to say the truth, quite unprofessional altogether, my dear Copperfield. Even Sophie's being here is unprofessional, and we have no other place of abode. We have put to sea in a cockboat, but we are quite prepared to rough it, and Sophie's an extraordinary manager. You'll be surprised how those girls are stowed away. I'm sure I hardly know how it's done. Are many of the young ladies with you? I inquired. The eldest, the beauty, is here, said Traddles in a low, confidential voice, Caroline, and Sarah's here, the one I mentioned to you as having something the matter with her spine, you know. Immensely better. And the two youngest that Sophie educated are with us. And Louisa's here. Indeed, cried I. Yes, said Traddles. Now, the whole set, I mean the chambers, is only 3 rooms, but Sophie arranges it for the girls in the most wonderful way, and they sleep as comfortably as possible. 3 in that room, said Traddles, pointing. 2 in that. I could not help glancing around in search of the accommodation remaining for Mr. and Mrs. Traddles. Traddles understood me. Well, said Traddles, we are prepared to rough it, as I said just now, and we did improvise a bed last week upon the floor here. But there's a little room in the roof, a very nice little room, when you're up there, which Sophie papered herself to surprise me, and that's our room at present. It's a capital little gypsy sort of place. There's quite a view from it. And you are happily married at last, my dear Traddles, said I. How rejoiced I am. Thank you, my dear Copperfield, said Traddles, as we shook hands once more. Yes, I'm as happy as it's possible to be. There's your old friend, you see, said Traddles, nodding triumphantly at the flower pot and stand. And there's the table with the marble top. All the other furniture is plain and serviceable, you perceive. And as to plate, Lord bless you, we haven't so much as a teaspoon. All to be earned, said I cheerfully. Exactly so, replied Traddles. All to be earned. Of course, we have something in the shape of teaspoons because we stir our tea, but they're Britannia metal. The silver will be the brighter when it comes, said I. The very thing we say, said Traddles. You see, my dear Copperfield, falling again into the low, confidential tone, after I had delivered my argument in Doey Dem, Jaipes versus Wigzil, which did me great service with the profession, I went down into Devonshire and had some serious conversation in private with the Reverend Horace. I dwelt upon the fact that Sophie, who I do assure you, Copperfield, is the dearest girl. I am certain she is, said I. She is indeed, rejoiced Traddles, but I am afraid I'm wandering from the subject. Did I mention the Reverend Horace? You said that you dwelt upon the fact. True, upon the fact that Sophie and I had been engaged for a long period, and that Sophie, with the permission of her parents, was more than content to take me, in short, said Traddles with his old frank smile, on our present Britannia metal footing. Very well. I then proposed to the Reverend Horace, who is a most excellent clergyman, Copperfield, and ought to be a bishop, or at least ought to have enough to live upon without pinching himself, that if I could turn the corner, say, of £250 in 1 year, and could see my way pretty clearly to that, or something better, next year, and could plainly furnish a little place like this besides, then, and in that case, Sophie and I should be united. I took the liberty of representing that we had been patient for a good many years, and that the circumstance of Sophie's being extraordinarily useful at home ought not to operate with her affectionate parents against her establishment in life, don't you see? Certainly it ought not, said I. I'm glad you think so, Copperfield, rejoined Traddles, because without any imputation on the Reverend Horace, I do think parents and brothers and so forth are sometimes rather selfish in such cases. Well, I also pointed out that my most earnest desire was to be useful to the family, and that if I got on in the world and anything should happen to him, I refer to the Reverend Horace, I understand, said I, or to Mrs. Crewler, it would be the utmost gratification of my wishes to be a parent to the girls. He replied in a most admirable manner, exceedingly flattering to my feelings, and undertook to obtain the consent of Mrs. Crewler to this arrangement. They had a dreadful time of it with her. It mounted from her legs into her chest, and then into her head. What mounted? I said. Her grief, replied Traddles with a serious look. Her feelings generally. As I mentioned on a former occasion, she is a very superior woman who has lost the use of her limbs. Whatever occurs to harass her usually settles in her legs, but on this occasion it mounted to the chest, and then to the head, and in short pervaded the whole system in a most alarming manner. However, they brought her through it by unremitting and affectionate attention, and we were married yesterday 6 weeks. You have no idea what a monster I felt, Copperfield, when I saw the whole family crying and fainting away in every direction. Mrs. Crewler couldn't see me before we left, couldn't forgive me then for depriving her of her child, but she is a good creature and has done so since. I had a delightful letter from her only this morning. And, in short, my dear friend, said I, you feel as blessed as you deserve to feel. Oh, that's your partiality, laughed Traddles, but indeed I am in a most enviable state. I work hard and read law insatiably. I get up at 5 every morning and don't mind it at all. I hide the girls in the daytime and make merry with them in the evening. And I assure you I am quite sorry that they are going home on Tuesday, which is the day before the first day of Michaelmas term. But here, said Traddles, breaking off in his confidence and speaking aloud, are the girls. Mr. Copperfield, Miss Quula, Miss Sarah, Miss Louisa, Margaret, and Lucy. More tomorrow, same time and place, 5 Pacific at Fireside Reading live. And all the chapters uploaded to the YouTube channel Fireside Reading pretty quickly thereafter. Please subscribe and comment if you would like. And until I see you all tomorrow, please stay very well. Good night.